Hey everyone, many of you saw my recent video exposing astrophysicist Avi Loeb as a grifting fraud. An equal amount of people didn't see it, but whined in the comments anyway about how I have no business breathing the same air as such a supreme megagenius. Well, unfortunately for them, Avi's been busy grifting some more, so it's time to make another video to further expose his fraudulence and piss off some more trolls. Let's get started. In my first video on Avi, we talked about his script of lies in 2018 regarding exocomet Oumuamua, which he pretended was an alien spacecraft with zero basis. This put him on the map with suggestible masses, and he sold a bunch of copies of a shitty book. In all of his output, he lied about Oumuamua's dimensions, he ignored aspects of its behavior, he exaggerated deviations from its expected orbit while ignoring the obvious explanations that his colleagues provided, and more. He told the public that a comet was aliens because it's a fun story to make money and nothing more. Then, in 2023, he took an adventure off the coast of Papua New Guinea to illegally recover material from the sea floor that he pretended was pieces of an alien spacecraft which had crashed into Earth 9 years prior. In reality, the object in question was just a regular solar system bolide, meaning a meteor. It wasn't an interstellar object like he claimed. The spherules he recovered were just some bits of rock, and they weren't from the bolide he pretended they were from. They had been sitting down there for thousands of years. This can all be easily confirmed by the ratio of iron isotopes and several other independent threads of inquiry. Again, my previous video on Avi provides an in-depth analysis of everything I just told you, with reference to all the relevant primary scientific literature, so go watch that if you're not convinced. These two debacles amount to 2 consecutive rounds of the Avi Loeb grifter playbook. 2 rounds of stepping outside of his expertise, distorting data, making baseless sensationalist claims, avoiding legitimate avenues of publication and peer review, lying directly to the press to gain notoriety and sell books, and then whining about how any and all pushback from experts in the field can only be happening because they are jealous, close-minded, gatekeeping, meanie-pants doo-doo heads, not because they are accurately prosecuting his corruption and fraudulence. This is the playbook of a charlatan and media whore, not a scientist. Now, in that first video, I also briefly mentioned another exocomet named 3I Atlas, which was first spotted in early July of this year, the third such object to ever be detected. At the time that I was producing the video, Avi had already begun mouthing off with his typical script about how Atlas is totally aliens because he says so, instead of the exocomet that it definitely is. But I decided to limit that video to his first 2 rounds of scamming and allow the Atlas stuff to unfold for a potential follow-up video, and now the time has come. So this video will focus primarily on what we know about Atlas, how Avi lies about it, and the damage that is done to the scientific community through his continued campaign of sensationalism and his defamation of legitimate academics who expose his lies. This defamation always takes the precise form you would expect. There's a crisis in science. Academia is a stupid communism jerkface. It's the same fucking story every time, whether it's coming from Eric Weinstein, Sabina Hassenfelder, or Avi Loeb. Not an ounce of originality to the grift, likely because it all originates from the same handful of rich assholes who are constantly poisoning society with science denial and distrust of expertise. Despite the transparency of Avi's grift, and the certainty with which we know he's lying, there is a brainwashed flock that comes to his defense time and time again. Avi just wants scientists to keep an open mind. He's not saying anything is definitely aliens, he's just creative and looking at all the possibilities. Nope. Here's a quote from his first shitty book. Oumuamua must have been designed, built, and launched by an extraterrestrial intelligence. Must. Not a possibility. Must. Funny how it passed us by and left without any fanfare, just like a lifeless object should, huh? Then here's what he said about the bolide he pretended to recover spherules from. It's most likely a technological gadget with artificial intelligence. Not maybe, most likely. These are direct quotes. And he's doing the same thing with Atlas right now, yet again, for round 3 of the Avi Loeb grifter playbook. So let's talk a whole lot about this object, the observations that make us absolutely positive it's a comet and not a spaceship, and expose every single lie Avi tells about it. Sound good? Great. Let's first briefly set the stage. It had been expected for a long time that once observational technology was sufficiently sophisticated, we would find interstellar comets, and that a few percent of all the comets we detect would be from outside our solar system. Our solar system is estimated to eject 4 comets for every one that is scattered within our Oort cloud, and other systems likely do the same, which would mean that there are countless comets roaming the galaxy, ejected from their systems, and occasionally bumping into other systems, including ours. As we already know, the first interstellar object ever detected, 1I Oumuamua in 2017, seems to have been made of planetary ice, or solid nitrogen, much like the surface of Pluto, given its high reflectivity, the flattened shape that is explained by substantial sublimation, and a lack of a visible tail. So it was not the most typical comet, and this took a few years to figure out in detail. The second interstellar object that was discovered, 2I Borisov in 2019, behaved very much like a typical comet. Even though it was slightly different from the comets in our system, we easily recognized it as a comet. So what is a comet anyway? Comets are small, icy celestial objects that form far away from the sun, much like other Kuiper Belt objects, and due to some gravitational perturbation have been jostled from their distant, nearly circular orbits to then plummet towards the sun in a new, highly eccentric elliptical orbit, slingshotting around at high speeds, only to return again some number of years later, depending on its period. We've observed almost 5,000 comets in our system. We even landed on one in 2014. Comet 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko was visited by ESA's Rosetta mission, which dropped a probe named Philae onto its surface to gather sophisticated data. So we know quite a bit about comets. This is the general structure of a typical comet. At the center is a nucleus, a chunk of ice and rocky dust, plus some organic goo. The nucleus is typically only a few kilometers in diameter, although they can be bigger. Hale-Bopp has a diameter of around 60 kilometers. Most of the time, the nucleus does nothing, but as it approaches the sun, the ices sublime, meaning they go from the solid phase to the gas phase. Water ice sublimes at temperatures typically reached once within 3 astronomical units from the sun, though some water vapor can be produced as far away as 6 AU. More volatile species, like carbon dioxide, typically sublime at lower temperatures, and thus even further out. There is often a sequence of different ices subliming as a comet approaches the sun. As the ices sublime, dust and other ice particles trapped within them are released as well. The comet's gravity is too small to hold on to much. Gas and other particles, those being rocky dust grains and ice grains, surround the nucleus in a coma that is thousands of kilometers across. That's the main thing we can see. It's largely transparent, but because it's so big, it still reflects a lot of sunlight. The solar wind and solar radiation pressure push the dust and ice grains away from the nucleus, forming a dust tail. The gas is pushed back too, plus the gas that is sublimed from the dust grains. Molecules like H2O can be broken up by sunlight into H and OH radicals. Many other molecules can be ionized by sunlight as well. As they do, they are left in an energetic state, which causes them to emit photons of characteristic wavelengths, which we can detect here on Earth to discern their presence. These ions are swept back by the solar wind, forming an ion tail. The ion tail and the coma glow from the light emitted by the ions. The ion tail always points directly away from the sun, while the dust tail curves and lags behind the comet, influenced by both the solar radiation pressure and the comet's orbital motion. Comets emit all sorts of gases, H2O, CO2, CO, and other volatile species. But around 5 years ago, astronomers learned that dozens of solar system comets have iron and nickel in that gas too, which was surprising because these heavier substances are not volatile. High temperatures are required to vaporize metal. The leading explanation is that cosmic rays and other types of radiation cause reactions in CO or CO2-bearing ices, forming carbonyls that associate with the metals to make organometallic compounds like FeCO5 or NiCO4. These are volatile, so they sublime, and once they're in the gas phase, sunlight breaks them up, releasing iron and nickel atoms. More on that later. Moving on to 2I Borisov, this definitely came from interstellar space and is now on its way back out there. It did all the comety things. It had a coma and tail with normal comet gases, C2, Cn, CO, CO2, H2O, and OH. It even had iron and nickel emission. The proportions of these gases were unusual for a solar system comet, but not unprecedented. 2I Borisov had a small nucleus, less than half a kilometer across. A key thing about Borisov is that when it was discovered, discovered in August 2019. It was 2.64 AU from the sun. At that point, water ice was subliming, so it was already actively doing all the things comets do. It was discovered by an amateur astronomer, so it had to be active to be discovered that way, or it wouldn't have been detectable. We expected that the next interstellar comet to be discovered would also do all these things. Fast forward a few years, and 3I Atlas has exhibited all the same qualities as Borisov, but with one twist. Here in 2025, we've gotten so much better at discovering comets that we discovered Atlas when it was at a distance of 4.53 AU from the sun, before it had even started to do a bunch of comedy things. So we got to see everything unfold in real time. Now, we have to make it absolutely clear up front that 3I Atlas has never once looked like anything other than a comet. Never. Upon its discovery on July 1st, it was immediately recognized to be traveling at speeds that made it interstellar, and it had a fuzzy coma around it, making it a comet. On July 2nd, the very next day, did you hear me? The next day, the Minor Planet Center designated it 3I Atlas and C2025N1, meaning that the astronomical community immediately understood that this was an interstellar comet. It was not expected for much H2O to sublime at that distance, but many comets have volatiles like CO and CO2 that sublime and outgas that far from the sun, and that's what it looked like at the time. Later observations confirmed this. It was immediately seen to have a tail that looked small in the sky because of the angle of observation, since the tail was essentially facing away from us. Its brightness was extremely normal for a comet at that distance. The brightness would be equivalent to an asteroid around 20 kilometers in diameter, but it wasn't an asteroid, it was a comet. Most of the light reflected is from particles. The very first papers written about it made this precise point. Its color was quite red as the reddest Kuiper Belt objects, and about the same redness as 2I Borisov. Nothing unusual. The orbit is interesting in that its trajectory happens to be only 5 degrees off of the Earth's orbital plane, or the ecliptic, essentially the plane of the solar system. Because of this, and because it got within 1.36 AU of the sun at its perihelion last month, it inevitably made some relatively close passes to some inner planets, namely Mars and Venus, and it will make a close approach to Jupiter on its way out. On July 20th, based on the wavelengths of sunlight that were reflected, it was reported that not only were the coma particles red, there were also water ice grains in there. Like many such objects, it was determined to have ice with irradiated organics called tholins in them. As expected, the water ice grains had likely just started vaporizing in late July. On July 30th and August 1st, the Swift Observatory saw emission from OH radicals from a wide field of view around the comet. It's likely that this was due to photodissociated water molecules from those ice grains in the coma. As it got closer to the sun and heated up, various gases sublimed and became visible. Observations in mid-August by the Sphere X mission showed water ice and CO2 gas. Astronomers at Lowell Observatory saw CN gas around August 22nd. Observations by the Very Large Telescope on August 21st showed CN gas and also nickel vapor. Observations in mid-August by the James Webb Space Telescope confirmed all of this. Starting August 28th, as the comet got inside 2.64 AU, iron vapor was also detected as expected. As time went on, the iron-nickel ratio in the gas increased to near solar values. Through September, more CN and other gases were detected. As the comet began its curve around the sun, the dust tail became oriented to the side of the comet from our perspective and appeared longer in the sky. The velocity with which the comet approached the solar system was 58 kilometers per second, which is a bit high compared with Oumuamua and Borisov, but consistent with it having been in the galaxy a long time, so it has been scattered by more close calls with other stars. It's thought to be roughly 7 billion years old, so it's older than the solar system. Compared to solar system comets, this comet is redder, has a lower abundance of hydrocarbons, as evidenced by C2 emission, and a low but increasing iron-nickel ratio. But even solar system comets always show variations, and nothing about 3I Atlas is unprecedented. Nothing about it is uncomet-like. I will repeat for emphasis, there was never a single observation made about Atlas that would lead anyone to believe with any empirical basis that it was anything other than a comet. Got that? Let's continue. The comet reached perihelion on October 29th and was on the other side of the Sun with respect to the Earth. It is just recently newly visible again with Earth-based telescopes as it emerged from behind the Sun just before the release of this video. The Punch mission, designed to look for things near the Sun, has already seen it. It's on its trajectory. Preliminary data shows that, like all comets, it's exhibiting non-gravitational accelerations from all those gases pushing off its sunlit side, with a push that is totally consistent with it being less than 1 kilometer in size. Okay, sorry for all the information there, but it's very important context, because we are now going to talk about how Avi has lied about this object from the moment the astronomical community became aware of it. He's been itching for another round of grifting, and he decided on day one that this was it. Another juicy exocomet that he can call aliens because reasons. So what did he do? Every step of the way, Avi has tried to inject manufactured doubt. This thing we definitely know to be true might not be true because of this thing I made up. That's the gist of the tactic. We know the difference between healthy skepticism and manufactured doubt. A climate scientist may be skeptical of the link between carbon dioxide and climbing temperatures, analyze the data and find a strong correlation, but also uncover other factors, requiring further analysis. Manufactured doubt is someone using scientific language to conclude, without thorough analysis, that carbon dioxide levels aren't rising, but if they are, then it isn't our fault, and anyway, carbon dioxide is good for plants, so stop complaining. This is the kind of bullshit we dealt with in the Matt Ridley video. This type of gish gallop is the behavior of someone who is not interested in uncovering truth or applying the scientific method, but just manufacturing doubt for some other reason. There's usually a profit motive behind this. Manufactured doubt has been used to stifle efforts to remove lead from gasoline, keep kids dying of measles, all the good stuff. And Avi sure as fuck is personally profiting from the doubt he manufactures. He can't fund his Galileo project or sell his crappy books if objects like Oumuamua or Atlas are just obviously chunks of rock or ice. He also gets to play the maverick hero scientist, exposing a corrupt scientific establishment, which he ironically is a part of, to the adulation of a public that desperately wants to believe in aliens and will champion anyone who provides them. So what were Avi's precise talking points? Let's start with size. From the first week of July through today, he's focused on the size of 3I Atlas. He wants to manufacture doubt that the nucleus is small. The reason is simple. If the object is abnormally large and part of a natural population of comets, asteroids, and chunks of nitrogen ice like Oumuamua, then we would expect many small objects for each large one. If the object is larger than 20 kilometers in diameter, we'd expect thousands of Oumuamua and Borisov-sized objects. Therefore, if it's very large, he can claim that it can't be part of a natural population and must therefore be a spaceship because reasons. Here's the problem. All publications on this object, starting with the first one on July 2nd, the day after it was discovered, convert the brightness of 3I Atlas into a corresponding size if it were a single body like an asteroid. That number is in the tens of kilometers. Every observational paper about 3I Atlas goes on to say that it isn't an asteroid though, it's a comet. What we're seeing is sunlight reflected from the particles in the coma. The coma is thousands of kilometers across and very sparse, so it can let through about 98% of the light, absorb 1%, and reflect 1%, and still reflect the same amount of light as a single object only tens of kilometers in size. The nucleus itself is not reflecting almost any light. Upper limits to its size come from images, but if it's smaller than 1 pixel, we can't say how much smaller than 1 pixel it is. The upper limits are typically tens of kilometers, but the nucleus is almost certainly much smaller than that. All the data are consistent with this being a comet with a small nucleus of less than 1 kilometer, and a coma is reflecting almost all the light. All of this has been known and repeated in multiple papers, literally since day one. So it's taken an astonishing level of willful ignorance on Avi's part to keep insisting that it's large. When confronted early on with the images of a coma, Avi dismissed them, claiming multiple times the fuzziness in the picture was because astronomers didn't know how to keep their telescopes focused on the object. He eventually seems to have acknowledged there is a coma, but he never backtracked and admitted his error. Next up, the gases in the coma. Until emission from gas molecules was detected, Avi made a big stink about how there weren't any. No gases means it's not a comet, so it must be a big object, and therefore a spaceship, because reasons. But remember what we explained earlier, comets aren't outgassing all the time. That happens when solids sublime, which requires heat, which requires a certain proximity to the sun. These gases were not expected to be detected until it got within 3 AU of the sun. By the time it did, in mid-August, it was outgassing as expected, and we observed OH, H2O, CO, CO2, and CN. Again, just as we would expect. So then he pivoted to whining about what a large single object it must be to be outgassing that much. Pick a lane, jackass. Then recall how some of the gas species observed were nickel and iron atoms. Once again, we learned in 2020 that dozens of comets, probably most comets, have nickel and iron atoms in their gas comas. These were also seen in 2I Borisov. The nickel-iron ratio tends to be near the value in the sun, but is quite variable. It can be a factor of 10 higher or lower. The models for this say that nickel tetracarbonyl and iron pentacarbonyl molecules form in irradiated isis, and then those species sublime at low temperatures. First nickel at low temperatures, then iron at slightly higher temperatures. Got it? Different compounds subliming at different temperatures, and thus at different times as the comet approaches the sun, which was predicted and subsequently observed. These species were observed coming off the comet at exactly the times they were predicted to, which is a stunning theoretical success. But Avi took every opportunity to say that iron and nickel should be seen in the same proportions because they are produced in supernovas together, and that the existence of nickel without iron must imply industrial processes. How's that for pulling things out of your ass? If he's not just bullshitting, then Avi just doesn't understand the concept of elemental fractionation, or honestly chemistry in general, so he's either lying or he's just really dumb. Even after iron was detected as well, precisely when expected, he continued to call the nickel-iron ratio anomalous, even though the authors had already said that the ratio would continue to change as more iron pentacarbonyl sublimed, and it was quickly becoming more solar. Avi either can't read or knows that his followers won't read anything that proves him wrong, so he just keeps repeating the same lie. Now moving on to the dust in the coma. At one point, Avi did admit there was a dusty coma, but also argued on August 11th that it had to be a very large single object to make that much dust. This is not even true, but he should have realized the inconsistency in his logic. Remember how he wants the thing to be so huge that it's not a comet? Well, if there is lots of dust, then most of the sunlight is reflected by the dust, so there is no evidence for a large nucleus, and therefore no super awesome huge spaceship. He discounted this and insisted that because the dusty coma is largely transparent, or optically thin, it can't possibly be reflecting most of the sunlight. Again, this is just false. We know how comets work. We've seen almost 5,000 of them. Instead, he insisted the central object emitted most of the light, and he would prove it with his huge superior brain. The way he tried to prove it is by looking at the data collected by Jewett et al. On the surface brightness profile, to try to show that it followed an inverse cube relationship, or 1 over d cubed, where d is distance from the comet. This might indicate that the dust was only reflecting sunlight from the central object. At some point, he even said that the amount of light it was emitting, around 10 gigawatts, is the signature of a nuclear reactor, and lots of media outlets picked up on that because, as always, alien stuff from Harvard guy equals tons of eyeballs whether it's even remotely true or not. But as always, he grossly mischaracterized the data since it's not an inverse cube relationship, and he ignored everything Jewett et al. Said, which in a nutshell was that this is a normal comet. He also posted some really embarrassingly awful calculations on Medium, because that's totally what scientists do, where he proposed that dust grains act as a collective plasma, and ignored a century of understanding that dust grains are pushed by the sun's radiation. The guy doesn't even know what a bow shock is. This is James Tour levels of incompetence. But it sounds nice to people who can't spot these errors, don't know anything about science whatsoever, and want aliens to come here, right? Regarding the nature of the dust, he then pivoted to say that this would all be expected if it was an interstellar spaceship. It would detect nearby objects without using radar. Instead, it would eject dust in all directions and see what the dust hits. Yes, the hyper-advanced aliens arriving from another system detect other objects by the super-advanced technology of seeing what dust hits. That totally makes sense and isn't just some ad hoc bullshit Avi pulled out of his ass. Next up, the non-gravitational accelerations. On September 24th, Avi announced a paper by Cloet, Loeb, and Veres, as always not yet peer-reviewed, in which they claimed that the orbit of 3I Atlas was equal to that set by gravity alone, and therefore could place an upper limit on the non-gravitational acceleration it was experiencing. They estimated the force from JWST data, reporting a mass loss rate of 150 kilograms per second and ejection speed of 0.44 kilometers per second, to calculate a force of 150 kilograms per second times 440 meters per second equals 66,000 newtons. To have a force of 66,000 newtons translate into an acceleration less than 6 times 10 to the negative 9 meters per second squared requires a mass, m equals F over A, of greater than 3 times 10 to the 13 kilograms, or 30 billion tons. For a density of 0.5 grams per cubic centimeter, this translates to a sphere with diameter of 5 kilometers, or radius of 2.5 kilometers. This was widely reported in the press. Let's first point out that this is way smaller than the numbers he was throwing around before. He's downgrading his mass estimate by a factor of 1,000, but it's still pretty high. One might still expect 100 smaller comets for every comet this large. But additionally, they made errors in both inputs. Again, the force is derived from analysis of JWST data by Cordiner et al. Here is the gas velocity of 0.44 kilometers per second they assumed, and they reported the following loss rates. This is how Avi got his 150 kilograms per second. But this refers to gas put into the whole coma. Comets have jets, and they shoot gas out in all sorts of directions, mainly from the sunlit side, but not exclusively. What Loeb and colleagues did is assume that all the gas shoots off in one direction all the time. Comets eject gas from localized jets, and comets are spinning, so the true non-gravitational force would be significantly smaller than they computed. As for the acceleration, they argue that there was a good match between observations of Atlas's position and predictions of one model that assumed no non-gravitational acceleration, or non-grav. They then found the maximum spatial deviations of the comet from that model were small and argued for an upper limit on the acceleration. This is garbage in, garbage out. If you find the best fit orbit assuming zero non-gravs, you're going to get an orbit that only works if there are near zero non-gravs. The right way to do this is to assume varying degrees of non-gravs and calculate orbits and see which is the best fit orbit across all of these possibilities. Especially because the non-gravitational acceleration would be primarily away from the sun, which means primarily away from Earth, so you wouldn't see much lateral deviation that you could use to detect a non-gravitational acceleration, at least not until the geometry changed from our perspective. It's very likely that a different orbit calculation that included non-gravs would fit the comet's orbit even better. This is nothing more than Avi muddying the waters with bad science that is only noticeably flawed to people who work in the field. Speaking of people who work in the field, expert dynamicist Marshall Eubanks, who has been analyzing 3I Atlas's orbit since July, did exactly this calculation as reported to Jason Wright in a post on his blog, and found that best fit orbits require some non-gravitational acceleration, with the 3 vector components of the acceleration being 8.25 plus or minus 1.97, 14.73 plus or minus 5.54, and negative 0.046 plus or minus 0.371 in units of 10 to the negative 7 AU per day squared. So there definitely does seem to be a non-zero non-gravitational acceleration of 1.1 times 10 to the negative 6 AU per day squared, or 2.2 times 10 to the negative 5 meters per second squared, the same value reported on the JPL website on November 7th. The comet just passed perihelion, and there's still some uncertainty associated with the calculation, but at face value, it's essentially a certainty that the comet is less than a kilometer in radius, which makes it on par with 2I Borisov and very typical for comets. So no, we don't expect thousands of smaller objects. After perihelion, Avi tried to downplay the non-gravitational accelerations, pointing out that there was no tail or jets observed, so how could it have the high non-gravs being suggested? Then on November 8th, images likely taken by some amateur astronomers showed a very complex tail and jet structure. In Avi's own words, is the network of jets associated with pockets of ice on the surface of a natural cometary nucleus, or are they coming from a set of jet thrusters used for navigation of a spacecraft? We do not know. Gotta love the use of the royal we there. This is all he does. No visible jets for like a second? Hey, there are no jets, so it's a spaceship. Then the jets are visible. Does he apologize for jumping the gun about the no jets announcement? Of course not. He just tries to find a way for the jets to make it a spaceship. It's nothing but spin and ad hoc justifications for his predetermined conclusion, which is not how science works. Speaking of which, now that we've gone over all the crap Avi spewed to manufacture doubt about 3I Atlas being a comet, let's continue to highlight more of the crap he spewed in support of it being a spaceship, which is of course the centerpiece of his grift every time, that everything is aliens. The speculations he mustered in support of this claim would have been patently false and completely idiotic even if there had been doubt about what this comet was, which of course there wasn't, at any point in time. Avi sometimes couches his speculations in the form of questions, so as to appear inquisitive and open-minded, and of course that's what his minions always claim he does, so that they don't have to engage with the abject falsehoods he spews. But even this is not always the case. On July 16th, in the article, Is the Interstellar Object 3I Atlas Alien Technology?, Avi continues to ignore its true size, and he mischaracterizes what it meant that we hadn't observed gases yet. He assigns malicious intent to several features. He makes the trajectory near the ecliptic plane and past some planets seem much more improbable than it is, as if the probe just had to see Jupiter and Mars. He suggests it came from the direction of the galactic center on purpose in order to hide amongst the background of stars, not because a lot of interstellar objects will come from the direction where most of the stars are. He strongly suggests the comet reaches perihelion when it is on the other side of the sun from the Earth so that it can make Oberth maneuvers or eject gadgets without being seen. He explicitly compares the comet to the star-killing probes in Cixin Liu's The Dark Forest. But all of this pageantry is just the beginning. On July 18th, he posted the article Security Risks from Interstellar Objects, amplifying this sexy manufactured danger for maximum seduction. On September 28th, he asked if this comet emitted the WOW signal from August 1977 that originated from the direction of Sagittarius and the galactic center, which again is where most things are. Avi claims that there was only a 0.6% chance Atlas would be so close in the sky to the WOW signal. This is obvious cherry picking. If there was a gamma ray burst in the same part of the sky as the comet, he'd have said that was weird and related to its spaceshipiness. But the gamma ray bursts are in other parts of the sky, so he assigns nothing special to them. Anyway, those numbers just prove that the signal did not come from the comet. The radio signal came from a part of the sky that was 8 degrees away from the comet, about as far apart as Rigel and Betelgeuse. He literally disproves himself, but with numbers that sound neat to people who don't know what he's talking about. Additionally, on August 5th, Avi responded in his Medium post to the question, as of today, what % chance would you say 3I Atlas is of extraterrestrial alien intelligence origin? With an unequivocal 60%. That's right, even though he claimed just 2 days prior in his August 3rd Medium post, nevertheless, at the end of our analysis, we must abide to the common sense of the duck test. If the interstellar object looks like a comet, moves like a comet, and outgasses like a comet, then it probably is a comet. Well, here he is contradicting himself. If you say there is a 60% chance this car is red, you can't then turn around and say it's probably green. He is obviously trying to play both sides. He needs a quote where he seems pragmatic that people can cite in his defense, while he continues to cater to the alien crowd with all his other output. That's called being a duplicitous fraud. As we can clearly see after all of this analysis, 3I Atlas is a comet. It was never going to be anything but a comet. Avi said it was a spaceship for attention and money, just like he did with Oumuamua, and just like he did with the spherules. Because to Avi, everything must be aliens, if saying so brings him the fame and wealth that he's decided he deserves, at the cost of the integrity of the scientific community. That's right, Avi is doing immeasurable harm to science, so let's talk about that as well. Every step of the way since Atlas was discovered, Avi has ignored, dismissed, discounted, minimized, misquoted, mischaracterized, and otherwise drowned out what expert scientists were saying about this interstellar comet. Anyone who makes a peep about his objective wrongness is met with hostility and accusations of jealousy, because everyone in his field must be so jealous of how he fumbles basic calculations pertaining to celestial dynamics. In his very public and very infantile retaliation, he inevitably condemns the entire scientific community and their approach. And whenever possible, Avi has tried to empower himself at the expense of scientists and the public at large. In a Medium post on July 28th, Avi reported calculations done by Loeb, Hibbard, and Crowell arguing that a delta V of only 2.675 kilometers per second, requiring 110 kilograms of fuel, could get the Juno spacecraft that is currently orbiting Jupiter onto a trajectory that could fly by 3I Atlas on its way out of the solar system. They said the possibility of this encounter would depend on the amount of fuel it had left. Their calculations for determining the amount of fuel left, which depend on a few factors, can't be verified because we don't know where they got the numbers since they don't offer a citation, as per usual. But let's do our own. A quick Googling pulls up this JPL press release, which says the total mass at launch was 3,625 kilograms, with 1,593 kilograms of dry spacecraft, 1,280 kilograms of hydrazine, and 752 kilograms of oxidizer. This fact sheet shows the specific impulse of the Lyros 1B engine is actually ISP equals 318 seconds, so they should have found delta V equals 2.56 kilometers per second, and they should have recognized that this refers to the total delta V attainable by this spacecraft since its launch. But of course, NASA didn't send up all that fuel for nothing. They used it to get the Juno spacecraft into its present orbit. The JPL press release says that when it entered its Jupiter orbit insertion burn, it had 810 kilograms of hydrazine and 422 kilograms of oxidizer, or nitrogen tetroxide, and it would have used 241 kilograms of hydrazine and 206 kilograms of oxidizer in the orbital insertion burn, leaving 569 kilograms of hydrazine and 216 kilograms of oxidizer, or 785 kilograms of fuel total. Of course, that's generous because NASA sent the fuel to also be used during the subsequent years of orbital maneuvers in Jupiter orbit. For example, lowering it from a 107-day capture orbit to a 53-day science orbit, and consumption of 73 kilograms of hydrazine during a maneuver in 2019. But immediately we can see, by their own math, that what Juno has left in the tank would allow at most 1.24 kilometers per second, way less than 2.675 kilometers per second. Whoopsie, and there's a bigger problem. During orbital insertion, there were problems with helium valves sticking open. As a result, they stopped using the main Lyros 1B rocket engine and relied only on the thrusters. Unlike the main engine, which uses both hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, the thrusters only use hydrazine. So the oxidizer is dead weight, and you really only have at most 500 kilograms of fuel. So that brings it down to 0.76 kilometers per second. In short, all of this means that Avi's bright idea is a non-starter. There's not enough fuel. There is objectively not enough fuel to do the thing he selfishly wants. Or maybe he doesn't actually want it and is only saying it because he knows it can't happen, so he can complain about how closed-minded scientists won't listen to his big brain ideas. Either way, anyone competent in the field would take about 20 minutes to go from, hey, wouldn't it be cool to send Juno to intercept 3I Atlas, to, oh, I guess NASA didn't design a mission with enough fuel to get to Jupiter and then escape from Jupiter to go do something else. But reality has never stopped Avi before, so on July 31st, he took it upon himself to get Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna to send a letter to NASA leadership urging them to redirect the Juno spacecraft to intercept 3I Atlas. More recently, in his Medium post on September 30th, he proposed the establishment of a United Nations Committee on Interstellar Objects to coordinate global scientific research on interstellar objects, claiming there are critical gaps. According to Big Brain Avi, he is worried about an absence of coordinated detection, classification, and intercept capabilities, insufficient protocols for rapid scientific response and international policy decision to time-sensitive observations, and the need for effective science communication to maintain government and public support. Part of this initiative would be to use his new Loeb scale to classify the spaceshipiness of interstellar objects. The Director General of this committee is proposed to be, surprise, surprise, one Professor Abraham Loeb of Harvard University. The proposed representative of the Secretary General is Anna Paulina Luna. An initial investment of $380 million and an annual budget of $80 million is proposed. That's right, Avi is the super best scientist in the world at looking for aliens, since everything is aliens to him, so he needs hundreds of millions of dollars to keep looking for aliens. Jesus Christ, what a fraud. Apart from the blatant manipulation and opportunism, it's all quite insulting, actually. The astronomical community has done a phenomenal job of discovering and rapidly characterizing interstellar objects. They discovered 3I Atlas at the remarkable distance of 4.5 AU, and they knew the next day that it was an interstellar comet. The next day. Avi had no part in that. He's just leeching off of real science to promote fantasy. By the way, if there was an organization that established protocols for responsibly communicating scientific results to the public, he would not enjoy being bound by those protocols, because his entire grift would go up in smoke. He would have to go rogue and abandon his own organization to sell his shitty alien books. That he tricked some congresswoman into buying into the grift, or maybe she knows it's a grift and went along with it for the cash, is totally irrelevant. Avi does not speak for the scientific community. He does not represent them, and at this point, he should not have the privilege of being one of them. Finally, the proposed budget is totally insane and unjustifiable. $380 million for what? All the infrastructure for the proposed activity already exists. Avi shouldn't be in charge of anything, much less allocating where $380 million should go, leaving us to wonder how much would end up in his pockets. As I showed in my previous video, Avi couldn't even plan an oceanographic expedition that would give conclusive results about the seafloor spherules he picked up. He never consulted other experts, or he would have known that the seismic signal he identified with the bolide was actually from an ambulance on nearby Manus Island. He didn't create adequate control samples, something children learn in middle school. And of course, he rushed unvetted and objectively false findings to the internet so he could do what? Sell some shitty books. Of course, Avi did all this not because he's stupid, but because he's a fraud. He knows he's wrong. He knows the spherules weren't from that bolide. He's just doing what he knows will look like real science to his target audience, people who have no idea what real science looks like. Despite all this, Avi repeatedly claims to be helping to popularize science. But he's not. He's denigrating science and popularizing pseudoscience. Just like Graham Hancock, or Discovery Institute, or any of the other frauds I debunk. Science makes falsifiable predictions. Avi pulls claims out of his ass and never admits he was wrong when they're falsified. And he's had so many opportunities to acknowledge how objectively wrong he is. He could admit he was wrong to keep repeating for months that the size of 3I Atlas is around 20 kilometers. He could admit that elements like iron and nickel do not have to be in the same proportions in every object just because they're made in supernovae, and stop characterizing their variations as products of industrial processes. He could admit that 3I Atlas had a coma from our very first observations. The list goes on. He doesn't want to popularize science. He wants to popularize himself. The end result of this self-aggrandizement disguised as a quest for knowledge is a bastardization of the scientific process being taught to the public. Through the compliant, eyeball-hungry media he manipulates, Avi teaches the public that science is a popularity contest, that anything can be true if you shout it loudly enough and defame any colleague that stands in your way. The harm his behavior causes is irreparable. It contributes to the general erosion of understanding and support for science, which has created a public that is actively hostile towards science and enthusiastically votes administrations into power that slash funding for science, promote pseudoscience through official communication, and drag the status of public health back to the Dark Ages. Avi is an embodiment of the sensationalism and science denial that plagues our civilization in this modern era, which is an embarrassing identity to hold as an alleged practicing scientist. And he's not helping fan the flames of alien hysteria one bit, at a time when Congress would prefer to hold hearings on alien conspiracy theories while simultaneously gutting the budget for NASA and every other department pertaining to scientific research. And if you needed any more convincing, on November 3rd, Avi used his platform to invite Kim Kardashian to his research team. Kim Kardashian, the science-illiterate moron who has publicly stated that she doesn't believe the moon landing happened.
For the record, do you think that we didn't walk on the moon?
I don't think we did. I think it was fake.
Oh my gosh, why aren't there stars? What's up with the flag? That moron. I mean, we already knew that he's a media whore, but this is ridiculous. Any serious researcher would not be caught dead making this kind of formal affiliation. But Avi sees followers and dollar signs, and he hasn't had a shred of integrity for years now, so he goes full reality show. On the bright side, letting Kim do some of the work can't possibly make it any worse. With all of that for context, should we listen to Avi run his mouth a little bit so we can all marvel at what a disingenuous piece of shit he is? Of course we should. Telling lies and crapping on other scientists is what he does best, so let's see him in his element.
My next guest, Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb, has suggested the 3-eye atlas is actually some type of alien technology sent here from another solar system. And he's come on the show before to lay out the scientific reasoning behind that startling hypothesis. Well, this weekend he made headlines again when he said that the object could actually be on a mission to release, quote, mini probes that could invade Earth. Avi Loeb joins us now.
That's right, you guys. It's definitely a spaceship, and the aliens on board plan to send mini probes to invade Earth. The leader of the aliens is named Zizbor, and the probes are made of a titanium alloy, given that titanium is abundant on their homeworld of Omicron Persei 8. The probes are equipped with numerous tools with which to implant themselves within the brains of top officials in every nation, so as to take over their bodies and secure political power. This will smoothen the transition once the mothership lands on Earth, at which point humans will be enslaved for manual labor mining rare earth elements, as well as for sexual pleasure. Avi knows all this because he's the best scientist in human history, and he used his gigantic brain to decode a secret signal in that grainy footage you just saw, which none of his loser colleagues were able to detect. Tell us more about Zizbor and his race of super beings, Avi.
I'll bite. What are these mini probes you're talking about, and how would this even be possible?
Well, there are two possibilities. If it's a technological object, then it might maneuver itself. We haven't seen such a maneuver so far. But the other possibility is that it may release some other objects that reach the planets, and it will continue along its course to the next star. And we just need to keep our eyes on the ball, the way that basketball coaches often say to the team members.
Yes, just the way that the sport coach tells the player, you keep your eye on the ball so you can win a score point from the basket. Two possibilities, says Avi. It might start flying around like a spaceship would, or it could release mini probes and then fly to another star. I can think of a third possibility. It's a fucking comet, and Avi is a fraud pulling things out of his ass to trick people into buying his books.
Because we don't know, but it may well be just a rock which has some ice on the surface that evaporates, in which case we will say it's natural.
You mean a comet? What you're describing is called a comet, the thing that Atlas definitely is. Why can't you bring yourself to even say the word comet, Avi? Do you not know what comets are?
You know, I defined a new scale last month that is now called the Loeb scale, where 0 is a natural object and 10 is a technological object. And at this point, I give it around a 4. But if it looks like a comet as it comes closer to the sun, I'll reduce the rank closer to 0.
Oh, he does know the word comet. That's a relief. But what's this Loeb scale all about? Oh, it's just a ridiculous attempt to make his bullshit sound official? Yeah, nobody is using the Loeb scale but you, Avi. Stop trying to make it a thing.
That is so fetch. Gretchen, stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not going to happen.
But anyway, on Avi's super special Loeb scale, the comet is a 4, you guys, which is equivalent to a 40% probability that it's a spaceship based on literally nothing, since he said this in September after a solid 2 months of everyone knowing that it's definitely a comet. At least he's come down from 60%, but it's still not what it should be, which is 0.
Well, 4 is not 10, so it's actually, you think there's more of a shot that it really is actually just a comet?
Yeah, the reason was that the inferred size of the object was huge. It was between 20 and 46 kilometers, unless there is a dense cloud of dust around it that is scattering sunlight. This is an object, if that is the size of it, that is 1,000,000 times more massive than the previous interstellar objects we've seen, and that's quite unlikely.
And that's a lie, as we demonstrated quite thoroughly. The size is not anomalous at all. And sorry, unless there is a cloud of dust around it, you mean like the dust cloud that is definitely around it? Come on, Avi, got anything better?
And the second is that the trajectory is aligned with the plane of the planets around the sun. Now, we will get a good image of it when it comes close to Mars on October 3rd. We don't need to wait a lot.
More lies. It's not aligned with the ecliptic. It's pretty close, 5 degrees, but that's not precise alignment, so he's lying. October has come and gone. Everyone knows even more conclusively that it's a comet, and Avi hasn't changed his tune one bit.
The fun of doing science is that we are guided by evidence and not prejudice.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna is asking NASA to monitor 3I Atlas and to send an orbital spacecraft even closer to it as it passes. That would give, what are the chances that NASA will agree to do that? Because that would certainly give us even more data, right? Even more images.
Yeah, this came because she actually spoke with me on the phone, and I mentioned
so
the
you
paper.
Put her up to it.
Yeah, and I suggested doing that.
Right. Avi politely suggested that the two of them try to scam the government out of hundreds of millions of dollars, the same government that just recently slashed NASA's budget by $6 billion. Okay, let's listen to Avi with walking shit-stained Glenn Beck.
So tell me about 3I Atlas and why you say it may have alien technology.
Right. So let me give you the facts. I mean, the whole point about doing science is that we can collect evidence, data from instruments, and we don't need to rely on stories that people tell.
Said the fraud, ignoring all the data and telling stories. Good God, what a gaslighting maniac this guy is.
So what are the facts that make it really unusual? Well, first of all, it's the size. As I mentioned in the beginning, we expect many more small objects than big objects. Then there is the fact that, the Hubble Space Telescope observed it and noticed, in the image, it displays a glow that is towards the sun, pointing towards the sun, instead of what you usually see for comets, where you see glow pointing away from the sun, just like seeing an animal in your backyard. And everyone says, oh, it must be a street cat because it has a tail. But then you look at the photograph of this animal and you see that the tail is coming from its forehead. In addition, the trajectory of this object is aligned to within 5 degrees with the ecliptic plane of the planets around the sun. And the chance of that is 1 in 500.
Lies about the size and lies about the dust tail. There was briefly a small sunward pointing tail due to heavy particles not getting pushed back by solar pressure when it was far from the sun. But the tail has been like that of a totally normal comet for a while at this point, so he's just full of shit. And then more lies about the probability of its trajectory being coincidentally near the ecliptic. Not that it matters anyway, since we've seen so few of these objects.
And you ask why? Why is it coming in a plane? And by the way, all of these anomalies, nobody that is calling himself or herself a comet expert, they just say it's a comet. But if you ask them, why is that? They would not have an explanation. Why does it come in the plane? Oh, it's by chance. Why is it so big? Oh, it's by chance. Why is it, why does it have this glow towards the sun rather than away? Oh, it's something we don't fully understand. So they would say that, but they would not admit that it could be something else.
All of this has been explained to you in great detail by frustrated colleagues who are tired of your antics. You ignore all of them and keep spewing your script of lies on every platform that will have you. This one was posted October 20th. Dozens of peer-reviewed publications are available that contradict the bullshit you're spewing while you pretend that nobody out there is doing science but you. Pathetic. And finally, we get to Avi's favorite friend. The biggest platform he can get with the least amount of pushback on his lies is... who the hell else? Joe Rogan. A couple weeks ago, Avi went on Joe's show for at least the third time to spew all of his alien bullshit with zero pushback, since Joe has zero ability to push back on Avi's claims, and also really wants them all to be true, because aliens are super cool, and they probably built the pyramids, and vaccines kill people because Bill Gates, blah blah blah. Let's get some highlights from this turd fest.
There is a lot of misinformation. Some people said, I invented 3i Atlas, this object, in order to distract attention from the Epstein files.
Is that what people are saying?
Yeah, and I said, look, this object is the size of Manhattan Island. It's at 4.5 times the Earth-Sun separation. If I was able to put it out there, I would be more powerful than the Pope.
Starting off strong in the first minute with a big old straw man. Nobody credible is saying that you invented this object, Avi. Nobody credible is suggesting you put it out there or that it doesn't exist. It's a comet and you lie about it. Get with the program.
Initially, a lot of people were dismissing your concerns, and they were saying that this object is nothing but a comet and it's very normal. But then as it got closer and as we got more data, it seems like you're correct.
Well,
this is a very unusual object.
Nope. The closer it got and the more data that was collected, the more normal it got. There is literally nothing about the object that does not conform to the completely typical characteristics of a comet. You've been duped, Joe.
Anyway, we are born on this rock, which is just 3 millionths of the mass of the sun. It's leftover material from the formation process of the sun. Some debris was left over in a disk and the Earth was made out of that. That's it. And it's just a speck of material, nothing significant. And this Earth was moving around the sun 4.54 billion times before the Vatican even existed. And why do I say the Vatican? Because the Vatican put Galilei in house arrest when he said, I don't think everything moves around the Earth. I see some moons through my telescope. I see some moons around Jupiter. They don't seem to revolve around the Earth. They revolve around Jupiter. Therefore, the Earth is not at the center. So they put him in house arrest. Today, they would have, canceled him on social media.
Galileo and cancel culture. The Catholic Church tried to cancel Galileo, just like the scientific community is trying to cancel me. Millions of scientists are all inquisitors, and I'm just like my hero Galileo. Anyone who says otherwise is a woke trans-communist snowflake trying to cancel me. Case closed. What an asshole.
Once you reach a certain threshold, you can't shove anomalies under the carpet of traditional thinking, the way that my colleagues do. Just to give you an example, the first interstellar object was Oumuamua, okay? And it was discovered 2017, and it was really strange because it was shaped like a pancake based on all the data we have, and it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force without showing any evaporation, no gas or dust around it. What did these conservative comet experts say? Most recently, just in December 2024, there was a paper of them saying, it's a comet. It's a dark comet. In other words, a comet where you can't see the cometary tail around it. So it's just like experts, specializing in zebras. And they go to the zoo and they see an elephant. So then they say, oh, the elephant is a zebra without stripes. And I say, no, it's a completely different animal. A spacecraft would appear differently than a rock, than a comet, because it will not have a cometary tail. It could be propelled by something else.
Jesus Christ, these fucking analogies. Nobody is sweeping anomalies under the rug. You're just fabricating anomalies. Atlas is a typical comet in literally every way. And Oumuamua isn't a zebra, elephant, or whatever the fuck you're trying to say. It has a particular shape and a particular structure that we now understand quite well. And you're just butthurt that you have to admit it wasn't aliens like you pretended it was to sell books. Just like you'll have to do in 6 months when Atlas is gone and no alien invasion occurs.
By the way, if you decide not to collect evidence, not to look for it, then you will not find it. So I say, extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary funding. You really need to put resources to find the evidence. By not attending to this possibility, you will not, by not imagining this. And by the way, I much prefer to listen to imaginative science fiction writers, first class, because they're much more interesting than second class scientists who don't have an imagination, and they not only have a problem with discussing alien intelligence, they also have a problem with whoever discusses it, and they would try to suppress that voice.
Money me, please. Scientists aren't doing science, even though they definitely are, so give me money to pretend to do the science they're already doing. Hey, asshole, thousands of people are looking in every direction of the sky every single day to see what's there. You take the things other people find and call them aliens to sell books. And yes, we know that you'd rather talk about science fiction than listen to your colleagues. That's evident by the science fiction you try to pass off as real science. Nobody is suppressing you. Nobody is afraid of talking about aliens. It's just common knowledge among astronomers that you're a complete fraud, and this is your way of deflecting.
You can ask also whether on Earth there was a sophisticated technological civilization before us that somehow, either through self-inflicted wounds or because of a natural catastrophe, disappeared.
Well, there's a lot of people that think that, especially now that they're looking at the pyramids and these structures that appear to be underneath the pyramids.
Uh-oh, Joe just came in his pants. Super secret ancient civilizations. Daddy Graham Hancock, tell me my favorite bedtime story again while I pleasure myself. Joe, you mongoloid, there are no huge structures under the pyramid. That's called a hoax. You fell for a hoax on the internet for the millionth time. But everyone can go watch my video debunking the shit out of Graham if they like. Now back to the space stuff.
And then it saw a near-Earth object, so they flagged it for that reason, and they realized it's moving too fast to be bound by gravity to the sun, and that was Oumuamua. And then it looked weird. Now, I had no agenda. I was working on cosmology. At the time, I was working on black holes. I was the founding director of the Black Hole Initiative at Harvard, and Stephen Hawking had Passover at my home in 2016. This object was discovered a year later.
You had no agenda. You completely shifted your entire research focus to enter a subfield you know next to nothing about and started lying out of your ass about an exocomet to sell books about aliens. But you had no agenda. That's crazy talk.
Yeah. And the same thing within the paper itself. There are statements that are clearly because the student was using AI. I'm really worried about that because the young people are not reading.
Right.
They don't read history, so they go to protests that make no sense.
Right.
They don't, and people say, oh, that is always the youthful thing to do. But no. This one is triggered by misinformation. It's triggered
and it's organized.
And it's organized, exactly.
Yes.
Which protests would you be referring to, Avi? Would those be pro-Palestine protests? Are you implying that everyone who protests Israel's genocide does so because they were tricked by artificial intelligence? Pathetic. I already talked at great length about how Avi is a Zionist piece of shit in the previous video, so we don't need more of that here.
So now, when you listen to comet experts that say, well, this claim or that claim was never published in a peer-reviewed journal, guess what? They are the editors or the reviewers who are blocking the discussion on possibilities. And I think it's inappropriate, especially in the case of alien technology, because it could be a black swan event. It could be something that affects the future of humanity, and if we behave very conservatively, we might not last very long.
Well, it's also arrogant.
It's arrogant.
Yeah.
It's so arrogant to block Avi from publishing baseless sensationalist crap in legitimate journals, you guys. No, what's arrogant, Avi, is you asserting yourself over the entire scientific community and denigrating them for pushing back on your lies. What's arrogant, Joe, is you sitting there like you have a shred of a clue what you're talking about and pretending that platforming proven frauds is somehow championing free speech. You're both clowns.
What is it about your field in particular that you think motivates mudslinging? Like, why are they averse to risk, and why are they not just averse to risk, but why they are attacking you for proposing what seems to me to be a reasonable alternative, considering the possibilities given all the planets and stars that we know are out there?
That's the problem, Joe. What Avi says seems reasonable to you because you know absolutely nothing about astrophysics. You have zero ability to compare what he says to the primary literature for accuracy and zero interest in doing so even if you could. You're taking Avi at his word and he's a liar. That's why this shit seems reasonable to you, and that's why you're echoing Avi's slander about other scientists being mudslinging jerk faces instead of acknowledging what's really happening. Astrophysicists are tired of Avi taking a big dump all over their entire field, and they have begun to expose him. So he plays the martyr, whines about cancel culture, and you fell for it hook, line, and sinker because you're obsessed with this narrative and arbitrarily platform any fraud who pretends they're being unjustly canceled. Does that clear it up?
Then the media came to my door, and people started asking me a lot of questions. I got well known. At that point, the personal attacks started. So
Right.
it's,
So it's
jealousy. Yeah, it's
jealousy.
but I can tell you that I learned my lesson.
You can't
And
respond.
I just ignore it.
They're all jealous duty heads. Just ignore them. You're the most handsome boy in school, Milhouse. Haters gonna hate. The narcissism is off the charts.
2 days later, I speak with a reporter from the London Times, and he puts out his report and says, I read the report for half an hour to my kids, and they told me they want to become scientists. And, this is another thing that there are two things that are missed by my colleagues. One, it's an opportunity to excite the kids to get into science. That's an amazing...
Yeah, lying to children is okay because it makes them want to be scientists. When Graham Hancock pretends Atlantis is real, it makes kids want to be archaeologists. If biologists start saying they found dragons and unicorns, kids will want to study that too. Of course, once all these kids actually start studying science, they'll be disappointed to find out that they've been duped by grifting frauds, but maybe they'll stick around anyway.
So let me ask you this.
yeah.
Once the understanding of the composition of 3I Atlas, once that was out and people recognized that this is a very unusual object, have more people started to consider what you're saying?
Yeah, I get a lot of people sending me...
In the academic world?
Also in the academic world.
Yeah.
Those are people that say, we are inspired by what you're doing, They keep sending me emails saying, keep doing it. It's an inspiration to all of us.
But this is privately. Is
Privately.
anybody...
Yes, so many scientists have been sending him their support in private. He can't share their names because that's confidential, but they totally exist, just like his girlfriend that goes to another school, which is why you don't know her. In reality, nobody is doing that because the composition of Atlas is totally typical. It's not unusual at all. It's not unusual. For Avi to sit here and mislead Joe about its composition is all you need to hear to immediately understand what a fraud Avi is.
So what these zealots, I call them, say is, we don't want people to deviate from the beaten path because we base our stature, we base our honors, awards, and so forth on past knowledge. We don't want new knowledge unless it's proven beyond any doubt. But how would it be proven if you keep ridiculing anything different?
We don't want new knowledge. Avi is proposing that those butthead zealots, also known as every astrophysicist but him, don't want new knowledge. They don't want the thing that is what all of science is. I'm sorry, but anyone who falls for this script is an intellectual toddler.
Speaking about my colleagues, so there are people who said, oh, you're doing it to win the Nobel Prize. Like that's what or you're trying to sell books. I don't charge a penny for my essays on medium.com. Money is not at all what motivates me.
How about your shitty books? Are those free? The ones that you prop up in the background for every interview you've ever done? Oh, those cost money and you get some of it? Yeah, money means nothing to you. We all believe you, Avi.
And for the scientific community to ignore that is irresponsible. Why is it irresponsible? Because it could affect the future of humanity.
Well, I think the problem with the scientific community is the problem with all communities. They're overrun with ego.
I agree.
And
as I explained at the beginning,
it's just human beings when they get to a position of any kind of authority, any sort of a position of respect and prestige. They want to protect that at all costs, and they want to keep everyone down who they think is getting unwarranted attention above them, like yourself.
Jesus Christ, the lack of self-awareness is mind-boggling. Every community is overrun with ego, like the podcasting community, of which you are the single most successful member, which has given you such a gigantic ego that you're incapable of realizing that you almost exclusively platform frauds who use your show to poison society with science denial and elevate themselves financially. And everyone who calls out your show, and also the garbage joke of a comedy scene in Austin that you've cultivated, you just blacklist them and call them haters. Great work, Joe.
And let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Have you seen any compelling information, any data that leads you to believe that we have been visited?
The only data I'm aware of that is worth attending to is the anomalies of Oumuamua, of 3i Atlas, which are very different anomalies.
Avi, Joe is asking you if UFO stories about little green men are true. He's done talking about Oumuamua and Atlas, neither of which are even remotely as anomalous as you pretend. Joe is trying to tee up some UAP bullshit, and you're not taking the bait. There's supposed to be a symbiosis here. Get with the program. Oh, you're gonna start spewing horse shit about the bolide? Fine.
It must have been extremely tough, much tougher than all the previous meteors cataloged by NASA. Okay, so I can show you some images from that trip to the Pacific Ocean. Actually, it was documented by Netflix, and there will be a documentary coming out within a year, next year, 2026. This was the team of researchers that came with me on the deck of the ship, and we collected materials with a magnetic sled. This is a sled with magnets on top of it.
Fuck me, you brought Netflix with you? This boner is basically announcing that the entire project was nothing but a publicity stunt. We already talked about how the meteor was not extrasolar. The material he recovered wasn't from that meteor, and all the other lies he tells. But this just seals the deal. He wrote a narrative and sold it to Netflix. Harvard guy Avi Loeb finds alien stuff in the ocean. They saw dollar signs and agreed. Then he went down there with a documentary crew, rummaged around for some random spherules that had been there for thousands of years, and declares himself successful. Does that sound like how a scientist behaves? We have no way of knowing if we will succeed on this scientific expedition, but come on, Netflix, I have a feeling it'll all work out, since I'm going to lie about every detail the entire time. Bring your cameras. Unbelievable.
We should approach the universe with a sense of curiosity, but also modesty. You know, it's really, we desperately need to be more modest.
That's rich, coming from the arrogant, egotistical, narcissistic asshole who uses a script of lies to assert himself over the entire scientific community and lashes out like a toddler when professionals call him out for it. Remember when you tried to shit on a former director of SETI who spent her entire life looking for aliens and accused her of being a wet blanket who just doesn't want to find aliens?
Well, some of us do.
No, let me finish. How dare people make statements about scientists that explore these possibilities within the scientific method? That's the acidic culture that I'm talking about. There is an acidic culture that suppresses innovation in the current culture of science. And the best example is SETI.
Do we need more modesty or just you, Avi? Think about it. Anyway, there's not much else to say. This is the third round of the Avi Loeb grifter playbook that we are seeing played out in real time. Anyone who can't see that he's an opportunistic, money-hungry charlatan by now either doesn't have the facts or just isn't paying attention. That would be all the sheep who fall for his rhetoric about encouraging scientists to have an open mind. Stop being so closed-minded, scientists. You would be the ones burning Galileo at the stake for suggesting the Earth is round, or whatever the fuck happened. I don't actually care about reality. These mental midgets who whine about open-mindedness are the precise ones who trolled my first video on Avi without watching a single second of it to see how he's objectively wrong, and you'll find them in the comments section of this video as well, utterly oblivious to all the facts I just provided that demolish Avi's deceptive script. All they can do is echo his baseless complaints about how nobody is searching, nobody is looking, nobody is doing the work, which is preposterous at face value since he's not the one who found any of the three interstellar objects. He just bastardizes the work of people who find them at impressively far distances to inflate his status and make boatloads of money. Speaking of the work of other researchers, lest you think all my criticisms do not represent the scientific community, let's speak with one such researcher now. Steve Desch is a professor of astrophysics at Arizona State University, who specifically studies the origins of meteors, as well as astrobiology, or looking for signs of life on other planets. He even has an asteroid named after him. Shall we see what Steve has to say about Avi?
Steve, thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to talk about Atlas and Avi as well. Maybe ignoring Avi for a moment, let's just talk a little bit about the object itself first. What do you find interesting about it? Are there any new observations as of late as it's emerging from behind the sun? What's we want to get the pulse. What's the astrophysics community saying about Atlas?
Yeah, from the very first day it was discovered, it was recognized to be a really interesting object because it's an interstellar object. It's coming in at a speed so fast that it can't remain bound to the sun and therefore didn't start bound to the sun. And that means it came from another solar system. And it's so rare that you can see a piece of anything from another solar system and analyze it. We can learn about the chemistry of another solar system by inferences about how long this thing has been in the galaxy. We think it might have been in the galaxy tooling around for about 7 billion years, and that tells us something not just about a different solar system, but one that formed before ours, more distant in the galactic past. And so there's so much we can learn from this object. And it was also very exciting because it's only the third interstellar object and the second interstellar comet. And it was discovered when it was pretty far from the sun, 4.5 astronomical units from the sun. And therefore, it hadn't even really started to heat up and outgas. And so we got to see the whole sequence of how gases and other things come out of this comet in real time. So it's been a really exciting development.
Very cool. What about as of the last week or so? When is it that it began to become visible from the other side of the sun?
Yeah, it went to the closest approach to the sun, which is still somewhere between the distance of Earth and Mars, around October 29th. And the Earth happened to be ill-positioned to observe it at that time. But it is starting to be seen now by some amateur astronomers. And it was seen, I think, just 2 days after perihelion by satellites, like the Punch satellite designed to look at objects or close into the sun. So with that, we can observe these jets that have developed, as all comets do when they heat up. The gases are formed from ice, sublimating ice, turning from solid into gas, and it pokes through weak parts of a comet's crust, and it shoots these jets out. And like all comets do, it's been doing that. So that's been exciting to observe. And we can also begin to see something about the deviation from a purely gravitational orbit. We can hope to maybe see some sort of deviations. We would say these are due to non-gravitational accelerations. And again, all comets have these. And so they're routinely calculated. It's still just too early to see a lot of deviation. And so there are estimates of those non-gravitational accelerations, but it's still pretty noisy, and a lot of people think that they'll go down somewhat. But we can begin then to assess something about the size and mass of the object.
And that's due to the thrust produced by outgassing, or what are these
Yes,
accelerations?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
when the gases shoot out of the comet as the ice turns to gas, it shoots out in these jets, and it's very much like a rocket. We call it the rocket effect, and it tends to concentrate on the side facing the sun, and so there's a tendency for the push to be away from the sun. But the comets all are spinning, and the jets pop on and off, and so it can be
Right.
quite random too.
Yeah, it's not so clean. So d despite the enthusiasm I detect, there's a marked lack of sensationalism here when you talk about the comet. So let's pivot over to Avi. What's your impression of his rhetoric regarding this object and his general conduct in talking about it to the media, etc.? What do you and the scientific community think about it?
It's irresponsible. It is doing science a disservice, and it's doing the public interested in science a disservice.
Can you elaborate at all?
Yeah. So from the very first day, scientists, astronomers were able to ascertain a lot of information about this object, including the fact that it had a coma, a fuzzy uh, cloud of particles, could be dust, could be ice, could be both, surrounding the comet. And they were able to tell from literally the first day that this was a comet. And at no point in the days since then, in the months since then, has it done anything that would make you think, oh, that's not what a comet does. Every single thing that it has done has been cometary in nature, and it hasn't done anything uncommentary, and pretty much anything you would expect a comet to do, it has done. So to keep raising questions about the fact of it being a comet, or questions about the size of it, uh, it's all manufactured doubt. It's not there as healthy skepticism. It's not there to say, okay, sure, it's a comet, but is it an unusual comet? In what way is it different from other comets? It's all in service of saying this couldn't possibly be a comet. And it's really obtuse. You really have to be willfully blind to the evidence and really ignorant of it to honestly think this is anything but 100% a comet, and to do so repeatedly over months after being corrected also on these things is beyond any sort of, oh, I'm just asking questions, and it's beyond any healthy skepticism. It's simply irresponsible. And I think that it gives the public a really false view of how science is done. It mimics the scientific method because, of course, scientists they question each other's results. We all want to double check each other's work. That is built into the scientific method. You say, okay, but when I reproduce this, I get a factor of 1.2 different than you do. That sort of thing happens. But to say, oh, I'm going to throw away a century of knowledge about comets and the knowledge we've gleaned from watching 5,000 comets over the last century, and start from scratch, that's not really how science works. And it just really gives this false view to the public. And finally, it drowns out the actual interesting science. This is from another solar system. The odds are this comet is from a solar system that had formed billions of years before even our solar system formed, when the chemistry of the galaxy was different. There were different proportions of elements. It probably came from a different part of our galaxy. And that is so cool. And we can't talk about any of that or bring that to the public's attention because
Right.
all the media cares about is it a spaceship?
Yeah, the conversation that the general public has access to is absolutely saturated by Avi's claims, by alien rhetoric, by all of this stuff. There's just no room for a genuine scientific discourse, and I agree. I do think that's a shame. How many members of the scientific community have attempted to communicate with Avi on this? How many people have brought his errors to his attention? What is his reaction personally when doing so? Have you tried to talk to him? Have your colleagues tried to talk to him? What's happening there?
No, I haven't talked with him or tried to talk with him. On previous issues, we did try. There was a paper that he and a student wrote, Suraj and Loeb wrote this paper on the Chicxulub impactor, and they argued really incorrectly that it had to be a comet, couldn't be an asteroid, which it almost certainly was. And my colleagues and I wrote a comment, like a correction paper that would be published in the journal. And we had to have communication with Suraj and Loeb. And Loeb was included in those emails and never responded to me. And so instead what he did is he started to trash talk us and on archive, writing spurious papers trying to denigrate the work we were doing. So I just very quickly gave up trying to reason with him. I think that other colleagues of mine have written him emails, people who know him, and I would say it's probably in the dozens. I don't know though.
Hmm. What year was that incident that you just mentioned?
That was spring of 2021.
Okay, so that was yeah, in the middle of this the bolide stuff that he was doing. So
Actually, that predated it. This was in the middle of his book tour about
on
Oumuamua.
Oumuamua, okay. So yeah, he was yeah, riding the wave of the first round and kind of planning probably the second round. What do you like? What I'm curious about, how long will it be before Atlas kind of goes past Jupiter and then kind of starts to recede and you know, stop to, you know, we won't observe it as much and the public inevitably won't talk about it as much. How long is that going to take, and what is that going to look like from the perspective of the public?
Right. It will be observed by multiple observatories, and I think JWST will observe it again in the next few weeks in the month of November. And I don't remember the exact date. It goes by Jupiter sometime
Something
late
like
December.
March, I think, or something like that.
Oh, is it as late as March? Okay. But in the next few months, as it recedes from the sun, we will see as it comes around and is easily observed in November, we're going to see the results of all the heating it got as it was closest to the sun. And the expectation is that many of the weird chemical ratios will look more familiar, more like regular comets. So far, it has ejected a lot of carbon dioxide and water, but in proportions different from most comets, but not unprecedented. But the same gases as the comets, just in different proportions. It's emitted iron and nickel vapor, both like other comets, but in a proportion that's different than we've seen in other comets in our solar system. But we think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it is moving so fast, and it got very close to the sun before it was able to heat up. And so all of the things that comets do, it's been doing sort of late. It's behind schedule
Hmm.
in that regard.
Hmm.
So we expect that as it goes past the sun and gets heated up more, we'll see it look a little bit more normal
Yeah.
or like other comets.
I mean,
Um,
also, it's from another system, right? So why should it be identical to comets from our system? Who knows what other interactions it has had, how many other stars it has, you know, flown by, what those interactions looked like, what material was ejected in those interactions. Yeah, I mean, there's
Yeah,
a lot of
the
speculation
big
about
things
stuff.
being that it's from a system that was born at a time when the chemistry in the galaxy was a little different, and it's been in interstellar space for so long. Cosmic rays have probably dumped more energy into this comet than other comets, and all of those things make a difference in what we observe. But nevertheless, we expect it to look more normal, and then the activity will wind down through December, and then it'll go by Jupiter with nothing happening,
Yep.
and that'll be it. So I don't think there's ever a moment where we can point to it and say, "Oh, now I see. Now it's a comet." It did that on day one.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
uh, to those who wish to manufacture doubt, it's never going to look comedy enough.
Right. In terms of the public, it's fascinating because, you know, obviously I debunk a lot of frauds in a lot of different areas of science, and therefore I deal with a lot of trolls that come to their defense. In terms of Avi, there's just this ideological fervor with the trolls that infested the first video I did on him, and inevitably will be in the comment section of this video. That just it's never about, oh, that's an interesting perspective, I hadn't thought of it that way. There's just this absolute insistence that Avi's just asking questions. Scientists are closed-minded. He's the only one who's thinking of these possibilities. What can we say to these people? Myself as a science communicator, yourself as a scientist who's researching these objects in earnest, how can we help them understand that it's not one rogue truth teller against the closed-minded establishment? How can we help them see what's going on here?
I ask myself the same question. I call them the low bros, and I don't know what to do about it either. This myth that every system of experts is corrupt is not limited to science. It's pervasive. There's a lot of people who find the current state of the world and its complicated nature and our interconnectedness overwhelming or desirable. There's a yearning for this myth of the lone wolf or the maverick. We all really wish we were self-sufficient. We wish that we could just figure everything out ourselves and have the secret to the world and not have to rely on anybody else. And I think that desire is so strong that when somebody comes along and plays that role, it's intoxicating, and we really wish it were true and that simple. And it's just not that simple.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. It is a feature of virtually every aspect of science denial. And yeah, my goal is just not only to debunk those false claims, but also feature researchers like you, kind of demystify the scientific community and see that people should be listening to the consensus of the astrophysics community as opposed to one rogue figure. So that's all I can
And
do.
I'll add, consensus sounds like, we went into a back room with our cigars and decided this would be the story we would tell the
Right.
public or something. And that impression is strong, and it is so opposite of what science is.
Sure.
And of course, science is all about, we are trying to tear down each other, at least our hypotheses. We hope not to make it personal, but sometimes it does. Sometimes scientists don't like each other in the process. But it's all in service of tearing away everything that doesn't make sense until you're left with something that does. And inevitably, as a part of that process, you learn that it's almost impossible for one person to figure out everything by themselves. And you learn to trust that if a bunch of people who have argued about it have decided, hey, this is the only thing we think that makes sense, you learn to have some faith in that.
Yeah,
And
that's
not
what we go
create a
with
state.
for the time being. If that's overturned in the future by additional data, then we'll go with
Yeah.
that instead. Yeah, I think that that's very intuitive to the common public. Therefore, science denial has to rely on weaponizing the word consensus and making the public associate it with corruption as like a Pavlovian response, right? Because they have no ability to assert their narrative above the scientific consensus, so they have to take it down a notch somehow by association. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah. Let me know if you have any last thoughts. Otherwise, just I definitely want to thank you for providing your insight and yeah, helping the public get some perspective on what science is and what scientists are doing.
Thanks. Yeah, I really look forward to these future observations. And the Vera Rubin Observatory came online this summer, and in fact, it would have discovered Atlas if the other surveys hadn't found it first. But it's poised to find many more, and depending on exactly how many are out there, but according to our estimates, it could be dozens to hundreds of objects like these comets or like Oumuamua in the next decade. And hopefully that will put a lot of these conspiracy theories to rest.
Yeah.
As you see the same things over and over again, and you realize these are
Right.
just natural objects,
Yeah.
we'll get familiar with them. And as we see statistics about, the alignment of their orbits with various things, and you realize, oh, I guess it's random,
It's a roll of the dice. Yeah, how many book tours can Avi go on crying aliens every time before people put it together? Hopefully, this is the last round of it.
I hope so.
Yeah, I'm eager to see the reaction to this video. Well, thanks very much for chatting with me. That was great.
It was my pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So what's next? Well, as we said, 3I Atlas will continue on its trajectory, pass by Jupiter on its way out of the solar system, and keep doing exactly what a comet would do, since it's a fucking comet. No alien invasion, no probes, nothing. Avi won't admit an ounce of fault. He'll reference the handful of statements he made about how it might be a comet, which he only made in order to save face after the fact. He'll whine about how Juno wasn't redirected to look at Atlas, even though it was physically impossible for it to do that, and he'll start looking around for the next thing to call aliens with zero basis to sell another book. None of his science-illiterate fans will have learned a goddamn thing about astronomy or figure out how to think critically in any way whatsoever, and the cycle will continue. Unless we can get some of them to find the courage to watch this video, wouldn't that be something? So that's it for Avi Loeb again. His celebrity scientist status is only continuing to rise since that's what he spends most of his time working on, generating fame and attention so as to sell books and manipulate sources of funding for what may turn out to be some political agenda beyond fame and cash. What will round 4 of the Avi Loeb grifter playbook look like? We'll just have to wait and see. Until next time.